Okay, so welcome everyone to this afternoon in the UK, maybe this evening for you in the Far East, maybe this morning for you in the US. I'm Mark Plumbley from University of Surrey, and I'm going to be moderating this town hall discussion today. I'm joined today by Hanna Lukashevich from Fraunhofer IDMT, Romain Serizel from University of Lorraine, Magdalena Fuentes from New York University, and Dan Stowell from Tilburg University. So before we start with questions, I'm just going to let everybody introduce themselves. So Hanna, starting with you.
Thanks, Mark, for the introduction. So I'm Hanna. I'm from Fraunhofer IDMT. You may know Fraunhofer is Europe's largest applied research organization, and we are based in Germany. Their IDMT stands for Institute for Digital Media Technologies, or we are especially focused on AI-driven media analysis solutions. So me especially, I'm involved in research on music analysis, but also on analysis on environmental and industrial sounds. I can bring just a few examples. So for instance, what do we mean as environmental sounds? There we have projects, for instance, on urban sound monitoring, for instance, including traffic monitoring, or we work with bioacoustics monitoring, so signals outside, for instance, signals from the rainforest. With industrial sounds, what I mean with industrial sounds, there we work mostly on their acoustic quality control. For instance, during the production process, during the building process or similar, then for the end-of-line tests, and then later when the products are basically in work on predictive maintenance, because all the objects are making sounds, and it's possible to understand what is going on quite often from the sound. So Fraunhofer is a player mainly on R&D side of the business. So our main goal is to take their state of the art and beyond research and bring that to the innovation. So what is also really important for us is their trusted AI and the aspects of security and privacy, especially working with their sensible data. So thanks. I think that's enough for the short introduction.
Okay, thanks very much, Hanna. And Romain.
Hi, I'm Romain Serizel. I'm associate professor at University of Lorraine. I'm working mainly on far-field speech processing and ambient sound analysis. And for the past 3 years now, 4 years, I've been part of the organization team for the Challenge Task 4. I've been also coordinating the challenge with Anna Maria for the past few editions. I think it's going to be the 3rd edition now. I'm also a member of the DCASE steering group. Well, that's a short introduction.
Okay, thanks, Romain. And Magdalena.
Hi, everyone. My name is Magdalena Fuentes. I am originally from Uruguay in South America, and I'm now at New York University in the MARL lab, like Music and Audio Research Lab, with Juan Pablo Bello, and also in the Center of Urban Science and Progress of New York, which is the objective of both labs. It's a little bit different. MARL is concerned with advancing machine listening in general, both in music and environmental sound. CASP is concerned with advancing technology in smart cities, connectivity, and everything that relates to that. I'm working in both. I did my PhD in music information retrieval, and now I'm working in environmental sound event localization, representation learning in different problems related to urban sound, basically, mostly. And nice to be here.
Okay, thanks, Magdalena. And Dan.
Thanks. So, hello, my name is Dan Stowell, and I am an associate professor here in the Netherlands. I have a joint appointment between Tilburg University and Naturalis Biodiversity Centre. And my research for about 10 years now has been focusing on animal sound and bioacoustics. There are two main applications of this kind of work. Firstly, there's a lot we can understand about animal communication and animal behavior from sound analysis. Secondly, it's quite important for biodiversity monitoring and for helping to avert the biodiversity crisis. So some of the work that we're doing at the moment is very much focused on the latter. We want to be able to keep track of all the animals in the Netherlands, in our case, or maybe in the world. And we are at Naturalis and with other partners in the Netherlands working on a large project using sound, image, DNA, radar, putting all that together to create a sort of infrastructure monitoring biodiversity across the country. So I'm quite excited to be able to be plugging that into a wider framework. The last thing I will say is that within bioacoustics, we have a lot of problems, and I would like to I'd like to encourage people to help solve them in a DCASE style. So I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome again all our panelists. And Frederica, just a request for those who arrived late, if you could put the Slido link up again, then that will help anyone that's arrived since that first came up to add or vote on any questions. Okay, so as a little bit of context to set the town hall for our discussions, this is perhaps a broader discussion than was the industry panel yesterday, that there are specific questions here, but we're thinking about the past, present and future of DCASE research. So we're really here to think about where the community has been, is, and where it could be going. So I'll have some specific questions, but by all means to the panelists, please do use this to think about what this might tell us about how we should steer the community in the future. So I think the first question that I've got that's come up that seemed to get a lot of votes here was is about community effort for benchmarking. This is a question from Hamid Iqbalzadeh and others about benchmarking. Do you struggle to work out state-of-the-art performance and compare your method to other methods? Could we create a sort of software framework to compare models? So I suppose perhaps for me, this raises the question of around our challenges sort of form a benchmark, but maybe that's a one-off every year way that people can compare their models. Could there be some other way that we help people to compare things with each other? So who would like to start on that one? Maybe Hanna, I could start with you if you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so first of all, I would just underline once again that I believe challenges are really important, and we know there are like different ways to do the challenges. Of course, challenges are not solving all the problems, right? And I would say keeping the challenges is a key thing to do, but we need maybe to think about some additional things we could do to support that what is not captured by the challenges. I mean, having it not just once a year, but constantly. I mean, me personally, it's the last time when I was involved in some organization of some challenge. It's a bit while, but I know it's really, really a lot of work to be done. So if we want it to be a constant process, or we also need to be aware that someone has to take care of that non-stop the whole of the year. And I believe it could be more difficult than having the whole effort within a few months and prepare the results in a nice way. It's still a really, I have a lot of respect of all the guys who have organized the challenges this year. So not sure about that aspect of having it open all the year. I think once a year could be enough, in my opinion. But yes, we need to push the research, their reproducible research, and lower, let us say, the effort to reproduce the research. I mean, it's happening constantly already now, but even more effort in that direction, I think, would help.
Okay, thanks, Hanna. So we'll come on to some of the other panel members, and I think also one or two of the proposers of this one might want to come in. So Frederick, we'll see if we can let them in towards the end of the discussions here to add other comments. So maybe Romain, as one of the people involved in organizing challenges, maybe you could say something about this challenges and benchmarking related things.
Yeah, so I think there is a point here that there is no central place like to benchmark models outside of the challenge, and not all the work in the community is happening during the challenge. So you might miss some of the new advances if you're just focusing on what happens in the challenge and you want to know what happens in between. This doesn't, in my opinion, necessarily means that you need to organize the challenge all year long, but people could evaluate themselves and report the performance, or having something running automatically as suggested by Amit. But I mean, this is a larger amount of work. So I think it's nice to have and in particular for reproducibility and so on, to have a place where you can see what other people are doing and make sure that you're also not reinventing the wheel and so on. So having a central place for this, I think it could be also a good motivation for people starting to know, okay, if I start doing sound event detection at this point, like, where do I stand? What are the remaining challenges? I think this shouldn't be limited to a leaderboard with a number. In my opinion, and even with the challenge, it shouldn't be all about the number, because otherwise we would end up in what could happen sometimes in other communities where you have like state of the art that are lasting for 2 weeks, and then the next state of the art comes because the number has been beaten by 0.5% or something. And I mean, in my opinion, then it doesn't make sense to compete to be the state of the art and stay on the throne for a week or two, and then a new one comes. This is not really making the research advance. But if having like state of the art with, I don't know, other aspects than just a pure figure, then it would make sense. Like, okay, those approaches are having these numbers, okay, because people like to look at tables, but it's also somehow partly solving this part of the problem. And so here it remains to be solved. Then I think this could be really, really interesting to the community, or at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. No, thanks, Romain. So Magdalena, you've also got experience from the music information retrieval field. So there might be the things that you want to add from that too.
Yeah, I agree completely with Romain in the sense of that we don't want to only register state-of-the-art models, but we want to have a repository of like all the variants and proposals of people. I've been thinking about this problem before, not related to the models, because I thought it was too difficult to think about the models, because basically the amount of dependencies that you would have to handle, like from an engineering point of view of doing something centralized, I thought it was a bit challenging, given, for instance, that TensorFlow changes and breaks versions, or people use PyTorch, or like, I don't know. I just decided instead, like with a group of people, some of them are here, to look at the same problem, but regarding data. And our experience, what we did was to put together a package for trying to standardize the way that we work with datasets, with sound datasets, and that's like that we call sound data. And it's coming, as you say, Mark, from our experience in MIR, because in MIR the situation with datasets is even worse because of copyright issues. So our experience there is that it has to be something that's very easy to use and very easy to contribute to if we want it to go anywhere. So it has to be, as Roman was saying as well, a community-based effort to try to make this happen. And if I have to say something, I think that probably what would be easier to tackle would be at the level of the challenge to begin with. It's just my opinion. Maybe starting to try to, which I don't know if it's done already, have a uniform API across challenges for submissions and stuff like that would be like a nice way of starting that. And then with time, that will be easier to incorporate things into a repository, or it could be a repository of whatever state you have things. You do a pull request and you add it there. My experience is that people will not use it so much because it's not so convenient. It has to be something that interfaces nicely with the user, I think. Other options are things that are happening in the machine learning community, such as Hugging Face and other places that are kind of trying to do these frameworks for exactly this, the models. But I don't know, I don't have experience to that, but it's an option that we could explore as well.
Okay. Well, thanks, Magdalena. And Dan.
Thanks. Yeah, I would agree with what Magdalena was saying just then about the balance perhaps between the APIs and the convenience or accessibility. I think I want to say actually I'm quite happy with the spread of tasks that we've had this year, and one thing that I can see in the solutions to the tasks this year is there are interesting ideas in each of the tasks which I think will continue to cross-fertilize. So maybe part of the question here is about, how can we encourage that cross-fertilization and test if one feature representation used in one task is, let's automatically plug it into another. Maybe that's part of the motivation here. I think it can become a bit of a burden for participants, and maybe that's a touch of what Magdalena was saying. On the other hand, we do have this increasing move towards multitask benchmarking and multitask evaluation, and we're not doing that at the moment within DCASE. There are other places where it has been raised this year at least. Maybe we could include something like that. Perhaps there is a DCASE meta task where you submit a system that solves all of the DCASE tasks as one of your a separate task. Just to end with, I agree with the annual event. I think Hannah addressed the question of whether it should be annual or continuous, and I really do appreciate the community aspect. It's community aspect from the workshop, but also from the point of view of the organisers and the discussions of what should happen next.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So maybe just to add a little bit from my perspective before we bring in Hamid. I was involved in a project on sparse representations that included a toolbox to try and glue together some of the existing frameworks. So if anyone's interested, the small box project was what came out of that, but it was a huge amount of effort to make something that built all this. So this is going to need, some funding for a project to make this all work. So this is not a small exercise to do this. But maybe Frederick, if you can allow Hamid in to join us, who's added a comment. Hamid, are you there? Do you want to add anything from the discussions you've been having?
He should be able to unmute and speak.
Oh, perfect, guys. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Hamid from Tilburg University. And thanks for letting me discuss. Actually, I wanted to kind of clear the main idea, which is actually not about API or library or technical difficulties. The main idea is to centralize benchmarking in general and have a centralized place so that every paper that comes out, they add the results and the performance on different data sets, and everybody that wants to start in our community has an entry point. And all the informations are there. And since it's a community effort, it's going to be handled by the community itself. So everybody that publishes a paper does a pull request, adds the performance, and so on. So there are different stages that we are planning for this. And one is to first start this community effort to centralize the performances, add the resources and everything else that is related to benchmarking, and then see how the community actually is using it. If it gets popularized, if people start using it, if people start to contribute, and if so, then we will discuss that every performance that is added to this system then can become available through a high-level library that allows the models to be loaded. For example, if there is, I don't know, a Plumbley et al. 2021 paper, you see its performance on specific data sets, and you can just specify in the library the name of the paper and the data set, and then you load that model. But this is something that we will only discuss later in the future in case the community started to use. So my question for the audience is, what do you think about this idea of centralizing benchmarking and finding the state of the art and the resources easier in a centralized place? And would you use it if such a resource existed? And would you also be interested in contributing to this?
Okay, I wonder, Hamid, whether, because we've already discussed quite a bit about the benchmarking so far, in order to get onto some other questions around the topic, what I'd like to suggest is that if anyone wants to discuss this with you offline, have you got contact details on the DCASE data list for Tony? Do you have a contact details to get?
DCASE bench, and
okay.
The best way is for you guys to contact me, Ben, or Tony. We will drop our emails here. Perfect.
Why not start a Slack thread about it?
That's also a great idea.
But not in the workshop Slack, but in the community Slack. There is a Slack for the community as well, which I will mention later, but just, yeah, don't use the workshop Slack because this one is going to be closed at some point.
All right. So for now, contact us, each of us, and once we created any source, for example, a Slack or whatever, we will share it with you, and then we will take the discussions there. But at the beginning, we are still discussing and who wants to contribute and who wants to help out. So contact us, and once we establish this, we will announce it in the community.
Okay. Thanks very much for joining us, Hamid.
Thanks a lot.
And thanks for the discussions on this question. Okay, so moving on to a slightly different topic. So this was about the sort of algorithms and so on. So other questions have come up about the types of papers that we're getting submitted to the DCASE workshop. So there was a question about how do we promote more non-challenge related papers to DCASE. So yeah, a lot of people will use the challenge to focus on, but what about other things that are focused more on the techniques? And really, what sorts of things should those papers include? So should we have guidelines for researchers about what high quality papers would be? And also there was a concern, do the papers in the workshop, do we attract the right papers, or do some people send them off to ICASP or WASPA or something, some other workshops, or ISMIR? Should we mind? Is that a problem? So what sorts of things should we think about the non-challenge aspect of the workshop? So who'd like to pick up that one first? Dan?
Thanks. I'm going to go with one perhaps extreme opinion on this. I'm quite happy with people submitting their papers to other places, and I have an experience of this because as one of the participants task 5 this year. You know, we actually, the strongest scoring submission, they didn't send us a workshop paper to DCASE. They took it to ICASP, and I'm happy with that. It would be nice if they presented here. They do, of course, have the technical paper that they put here. Now, if they send the paper to ICASP or to ISME or anything else, it, I think, will raise the profile of DCASE at least slightly. I think it's good for us to be talking to other communities rather than being an isolated community. I also think that DCASE has quite a good specialist role. You know exactly what you're going to get when you're going to DCASE. So I broadly don't see any problem here. If we want to raise the scientific quality of DCASE in terms of having interesting papers that aren't purely aimed at solving the current task, then I think that's a good thing to think about. One other thing that was mentioned in the questions is the possibility of DCASE sometimes acting as a satellite event of some other conference. And I think maybe that is one route to kind of stitching things together a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm kind of arguing for the status quo, and I'd like one of the other panel members to argue the opposite. How about that?
Okay, anyone want to jump in? Or maybe, so Hanna, I think you and...
Okay,
just,
yeah, I think then that you have a lot of right points, and if people are coming to whatever NIPS with DCASE topics, I would be just happy, and the connection of the community is really important. So I don't really have an opposite opinion, but I think what one could do is maybe creating extra tracks, because I mean, DCASE is still kind of challenge oriented, but if we would announce an extra track on explainable AI, for instance, or an extra track on trustworthy AI is there, maybe we could attract some submissions with, you know, an extra price, extra krone to get, maybe. I don't know, and but just to encourage and force a little bit the community to think about other aspects.
Okay, thanks, Hanna. Romain, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what Dan was saying about submitting to other venues, and I think it's a good way to get a broader audience, like instead of just being only at DCASE. And I also agree that we know that when we come to DCASE, we know what we come for. And I know that as far as I've been involved in the whole DCASE, the fact that there were mainly challenge paper have been like a point of discussion. And I guess, well, for now, like for the past few years, we didn't really find a solution, or do we want to find a solution? That's an open question for me. I mean, is it really a problem to have like a tight link between the challenge and the workshop? I don't think so, not in the current form. Like a few years ago, that was like really dominated. Like this year, I've walking around this year, last year, and I think even in New York, I've seen like quite more and more people that were not directly related. So it's not most of the paper that are not related, but you can find like quite a few interesting papers that are not related to the challenge. So to me, it's not a problem, and I'm not surprised by this, because if we consider the workshop schedule, usually it's really tied to the challenge schedule. So the workshop submission is usually closing after the challenge result. So I mean, with strong connection like that, we cannot expect to have like a really different submission to the challenge. But so far, it has been working pretty fine for me like this way. So I mean, I don't see any reason to do a radical change at this point.
Okay, and I mean, maybe related is the issue of standards that we'd expect from papers like reproducibility, code repositories, or and so on. I don't know, Magdalena, whether you want to pick up on that issue or continue some of the previous points.
Yeah, I understand that it's a little bit more difficult for the authors to be like harsh on like you have to do like, but I'm leaning towards doing like encouraging very strongly more and more to at least have like a submission with a repository with the code. I think that was something that Frederick added this year, like that, something on those lines of like we strongly encourage, because it feels a bit strong to reject a paper based on that. But I feel also it's where the community is moving, and it's becoming more like the audio community in general, and it's becoming more and more easier to ask for those things. I think also it helps the quality of the workshop to have. I think it makes it stronger to have supplementary material, for instance, or to have the code available and stuff like that. So coming back to Dan's point of like having better quality, maybe that's something that we can target instead of like trying to, which is much more of a tractable problem than just trying to raise scientific. I don't even know how to solve the other one, but asking for a strong submission in the sense of like give the code, give some help to people to reproduce your work.
Okay, so not necessarily to mandate it, but as part of the sort of expectations that a high quality paper will have that effort, because it helps other people to build on that research. Otherwise, you're having to guess what the parameters are or how it might work.
Exactly. One possibility is not to be extremely harsh, but add it as one of the reviewing points. It's like, we are going to check that. So you are not going to be, if the work is incredible, you're going to get in anyway. But if you are on a borderline, you will appreciate to have some like repository or something like that. It's just an idea.
Yeah, no, thanks. Any other final points to add to that before we move on to another question? Yeah, okay. Romain.
Yeah, just one thing that came into my mind when I totally agree with what Magdalena was saying, but I think if you want to enforce the people like submitting their code, like well, we did for a few years try to strongly encourage, and we see like we have slightly more people like submitting their code, but not so many. So I think they should directly see that they can get something from out of it. So maybe having something like a proceeding of code that would be gathering all the code that have been released related to the paper. And then there is a centralized place where your code is getting visibility, not only on your paper with a link, but there is a place like, oh, look, there is all the codes that have been released this year. I don't know how technically this could be feasible, but maybe that would be a way to.
Maybe that relates to what Hamid was saying. Maybe that website is a matter of like, not I don't know, reporting on the results on the datasets. It depends on how many datasets we want to consider. It might be a little bit of a long table, but at least like adding the approaches where the topic and the link to the repository would be a great resource.
Or maybe even adopt something like papers with code and create an area for DCASE that just gathers together DCASE papers with code. So just to pick up a couple of comments in the chat, there was a question perhaps for Frederick, what's the ratio of challenge versus non-challenge papers this year? Maybe you'll pick that up in the closing discussions, or that might need a bit of calculation later.
Yeah, I will show it. Actually, I was thinking that maybe I should have showed the stats before the panel, because maybe some things could actually, but anyway, yeah, I calculated it. It's a little bit less than 50%, I think, and it's been going down. So less. It's in line also with what Romain was. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, which way round is that? Less than 50% challenge or non-challenge?
Yes, less than 50% challenge-related papers.
Okay.
Although, I mean, some papers are somehow in the middle, right? Because maybe they didn't submit to a challenge, but they are basically using a data set from the challenge and doing a similar thing. But yeah, it seems to be going down a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, and another suggestion from Noboru Harada on organizing a special session for non-challenge related papers. I think that's quite an interesting suggestion too. So thanks everyone for that question. So coming on to another issue, I think this may have come up before, the idea of a sort of society or what the community is. At the moment, there's a steering committee and each thing is organized by itself, but the Izmir community has a society that was established to help move the community forward. And so there's a discussion really about where the community is. Should it have a society? Where does it fit related to other things? So there are speech-related communities. There are music research community. There's a noise community. There's internoise. We're also seeing from our keynote speaker, the computer vision community now has realized that videos come with sound. And so maybe there's a relation for that too. So where do we feel that the DCASE community should be going in the future, and what are the options for that? I mean, maybe Magdalena, perhaps I could start with you from your experience from the Izmir community. What do you think about these sort of topics?
I'm not sure. Maybe someone else, yeah.
Okay, that's right. Anyone else? Dan, do you want to come in to start?
I agree with Magdalena.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure. It's a difficult thing to think about when you're working quite cross-disciplinary, and so we have the speech communities. Of course, there's the bioacoustics communities, which I would talk about. And we all have our little societies, and for example, we don't particularly want to associate too strongly with the computer vision or the speech communities because they're very large, and if we just attach to those societies, then it would drastically change what we do. Maybe that means that we do need a DCASE specific society, but then on the other hand, I'm immediately thinking about what about the bioacoustics communities that are essentially doing DCASE but underwater. It's a bit difficult to pin down what the unique selling point is. So I'm undecided, but it's potentially.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Thoughts, Hanna, and then Magdalena.
Okay, sorry. I mean, we've got a brand new Slack channel. How about having a bit of brainstorming on before we decide like how the society could look like, just thinking, okay, what that society could do. So what basically we would expect from the community, or like what we would wish that the community takes care of, and having just some brainstorming on Slack and then seeing like what is missing in addition to that, what we've got. Because my feeling is sometimes we could immediately call us here all participants of DCASE as a community, but what would that change? So that would be maybe my practical suggestion what we could do about that question.
Yeah, thanks, Hanna. Magdalena, you want to come back?
I was just like, the only thing that came to mind, but it's a little bit of like very small thing. I was exploring some like bridges now with like data bridges between like Izmir and DCASE and stuff like that. There are some ways of doing it like that as well, but it's a very particular case that I can think of. I agree with Dan. It's like it's a nice community. We don't necessarily want to touch to the bigger, intimidating ones. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost as if we need ambassadors to these other communities, but we want to be our own, not isolated island, but we want to make sure that we have those connections. Okay, Romain, did you want to add anything into that?
No, I quite agree with what has been said, and I think what Dan said is summarizing it well. Like we're all working, like, well, many of us are working on different communities and so on, and so in my opinion, it keeps like the work in the DCASE community somehow attached to the other communities, and we probably don't want to be too close to this gigantic community, because I don't know, at least I have the feeling that the way we are working, exchanging ideas and so on in a smaller group is working pretty well until now. So that's pretty much all I have to say on this point.
So almost in one sense, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I think, I mean, I'd like to say, perhaps add a little bit from my perspective in here, because Dan will remember that about 10 years ago, when we started working in this area, there wasn't a community. We started off by organizing a data challenge with a lot of discussions, and it ended up at a small poster session at the WASPA workshop in New York. And so that formed the number of a place where people could meet, and then that was built into the later DCASE workshops afterwards. But I mean, Dan, I don't know if you remember back to any experience of things that you might have been trying to do at that point and linking to other communities. Was it something that was clearly a need then, or would it have been able to work in other conferences or other communities? Or maybe that's for another discussion.
I'm not really sure what to say about that, I must be honest. I think it's, no, I'll come back to that. Okay,
no, that's all right. I mean, I think if unless anyone else wants to come in about, we are sort of coming up to about 10 years of the DCASE community starting from that. So it's been quite interesting to see how things have developed. And so maybe we'll move on to another topic, because there are a number of questions else that have come up here. I think one of them that quite a few people will be interested in is what should the workshop look like in the future in terms of how should we organize this workshop? So we've of course been used to our physical workshops, and it seemed that for the last few years of those, whatever venue we arrived, we pretty much filled the venue. So in Woking, we filled it to 150. In New York, it was filled to 200. Now we've moved to online because of COVID, and we've had 500, 550 from the opening for that. But what do we want the workshop to look like? Should we have some sort of hybrid of physical and virtual events? Will that work for people who are attending remotely or presenting remotely or in person? How could we make that sort of thing work? Who would like to pick up on that? Magdalena.
I actually have a question to Frederick about this. If there is like any sense of any stats on, like, I know that participation like increased with the first DCASE that was online. Did submissions increase as well?
Okay, that's going to be on the stats section after. So again, that's it was a bad choice to put it after the panel. But yeah, I will comment a little bit, because yeah, the number of registrations is very big, but the actual participation, I don't think it's that different really from previous years. So yeah, maybe I will show some numbers later, but is this answering a little bit what you asked? Or
what my question about the submissions is because I think that I personally don't see a hybrid and in-person thing working very smoothly, but I do appreciate the online conferences in the sense of like being South American, having issues in like both budget and like how far it is to go to these places when you're over there. Having these instances makes it not only possible to attend and like be in the community, but also to publish, because there is the issue of like having to attend in person to the place, which means that you have to get the funding to go, and otherwise you don't get your paper in the proceedings. And the thing is that we could go to an intermediate thing that we accept the proceedings with some sort of like an alternative way, and you don't have to come, but we do it mostly in person or something like that, that keeps keeps it open for people that cannot be physically there to still have their contribution, at least to the community or something like that. That's what I miss in-person things. by the way.
Okay, thanks, Magdalena. Anyone else want to pick up on how we might want to organize it? Romain?
Okay, so, well, honestly, I wish I had the answer to that question, really. Right now, I have no clue, and I guess everybody who is going to organize conferences in the coming months or something is asking the same question, like, how is it going to be? From a personal point of view, I realized that, well, it's having the virtual conference is better than having no conference, but you don't dedicate all your time to the conferences. And so, well, you keep like the real life going on the side. And if it's at the end of the day, you arrive tired at the conference, you're probably less likely to discuss with people and so on. So it's still some sort of degraded experience of the conference. And I do miss the physical meeting as Magdalena does. So this is the first point. Then there are things that are changing beyond like the COVID crisis and so on. And I guess like most of us, or at least some of us, are less inclined to take a plane to fly on the other side of the planet and so on just for a few days. So I think this is also something that we might take into account when organizing conferences, as well as being more inclusive to countries that simply can't afford to travel as well. So maybe like this forced conversion to full virtual conferences was somehow a chance to open our eyes to different ways to do things. Now the question is, how are we going to integrate all things to have a better solution for everybody once we can still meet once we can meet together physically again. So, and for this, I don't have any answer, but if anybody does, then please, you can contact me.
So I mean, maybe to pick up one of the points that Magdalena was commenting on is that if you want to get visibility for your work, you need to publish at the conferences, which means you need to attend the conference typically, which may be remote. But also there was one of the questions was coming out about the, if you like, the perception of DCASE workshop as a high quality workshop. So far we've sort of organized it as something where we bring people together to discuss about the papers, but we don't really consider about what indexing places the papers are going to appear in and so on. But is it time that the community or the workshop should be thinking, should we be looking to engage with a different way of publishing? Should we look to become a, quote, top tier conference for publishing of papers in this area so that when people publish here, that would be recognizable for their CVs, for promotion, or for applying for jobs elsewhere? Should we be considering that as part of the way that we organize our conference? Dan, I saw you nodding there. Do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and it's something that I've been thinking about, not just DCASE. A couple of other events that I'm connected to, we have proceedings in the same way that DCASE does. You know, we have full papers and they're available online. But I have noticed over the years that some of the papers don't have the impact that they should, and they don't have the impact that they should because if you do a standard literature search, you don't necessarily see them. You don't necessarily see them represented in the. You go, oh look, that's a solid article. I'm going to check that out. It can be a little obscure. I'm very in favour of modern ways of publishing, including preprint servers and various things. But it can be a little bit obscure for someone who's trying to do a literature review and try to work out what's what. And so I think having proper indexing, I think it's something that we should work on, definitely. And I think that would do justice to the work that's been submitted to DCASE. So one straightforward way to do that is, you know, to try and have the proceedings published by, you know, one of the well-known publishers that handles these things, or to always perhaps curate a special issue of a journal, a special issue of a journal after each DCASE workshop. So yes, I do think this should be done in order to do justice to the papers.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Hanna, did you want to come in on that, or Magdalena? Hanna.
Yeah, I think Dan brought already a couple of really good points. And of course, it's we all enjoy that DCASE, you know, even here, it's for free now. I mean, it's even for virtual conferences, it's not that obvious that everything is for free. So it opens the doors for a lot of people for the participation, but yes, or maybe it stops us at some point of having a bit more like quality, for instance, investing in the proceedings. So that could be a good point to do.
Okay, thanks, Hanna. Magdalena, I mean, maybe you've got experience from the Izmir community as well, because this was something that has to be grappled with there, I think, too.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that, and I also think bringing up from Izmir, like Izmir has this track of like demo papers or stuff like that could be added as a way of like still being kind of like inclusive to new ideas or like things. So could be like the main proceedings, the proceedings of the challenge related papers, and then something else that's more exploratory, and then you can raise the bar for the main proceedings if you want to, without like losing the community sense of it or something on those lines.
Okay, great. Well, look, thanks for all the discussions on that one. I think so. There's some really interesting ideas that hadn't really occurred to me as well. So I think that will give the next organisers something to think about. And actually, talking about next organisers of things, I think probably our last question here is, what about the task selection? And this is very topical because for those of you that are considering proposing a task, the deadline, I believe, is Monday for that. And so there was a question here about that it's not very transparent at the moment, the way that tasks are selected. So you maybe submit a task and then you get a yes or no back and maybe some comments. Should this be a more open process? Should there be more of a dialogue way of doing it so that the challenges that we end up with are as high quality as possible? Dan, you were a recent challenge proposer. We've got other challenge proposers here, but I saw you nodding along there. Do you want to comment on that?
It's a really interesting point that is raised, and it's it is a little bit of a black box process, as you've just described, Mark. I think what has been suggested by this anonymous question is really interesting, that we should perhaps make it more open. There will always be some private information, and we are proposing a new version of the few shot learning thing, so we have some new data sets potentially, and we don't want to publish all the details of those. So there will of course be private information. So maybe yes, the submission should include, here's the public description and here's a bit of confidential information for the review panel. That would help to make it more open. That sounds good.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Romain, as another organizer of challenges, what's your experience of this process? But also, you're on the steering committee, so you've got experience of being on the other side too.
Yeah. I've been on both sides of the process. I mean, so I don't fully agree on the black box aspect, because each year we are also providing feedback on why the task is selected or not. So I don't know, like as far as transparency is concerned, it's explained from the beginning that it's going to be reviewed by the steering group, and that the steering group is going to provide feedback. So that's just exactly how it happens. So I don't see any transparency problem between the way it's described and the way it's happening. Now, having more discussion, this is, I think, something highly relevant, and this is something that has been also discussed internally within the steering group. This is also something that takes a lot of effort, both from the people submitting tasks and the people who are going to be involved in the discussion. And so, I mean, if we're going to do this and no one is going to be actually involved in the discussion, then it's basically useless. So I don't have a solution to this, but it's definitely like having a more open discussion and having a longer time window to think about like the tasks and discuss with people beforehand and so on. That's something that we have been discussing quite a lot in the past few years, and it never really worked like well, I mean, we did for the past 3 editions with the call for proposal has told people that they could contact Anna Maria and me at least to discuss about the task, and we could bring feedback from experience and so on. And I must say that for the past 3 editions, I've been contacted by only one person. So maybe we should have an easier way to bring the discussion. Maybe using, I don't know, Slack or something where we could share the public details or the, I don't know, a summary, like a 5-sentence summary, or but for me the solution is not so trivial to find.
Okay, or maybe organize a panel discussion on proposing challenges at the DCASE workshop in a slot like this, perhaps.
Yeah, could be.
With more than 3 days deadline.
With more than 3 days deadline, yes. So might have to be outside of the workshop deadline. Hanna, I don't know if you've had an experience of organising or proposing challenges to this or elsewhere, that with any thoughts you might have?
I have a resort from the other corner. I mean, the reason of ours organizing the challenges because we want to have progress in particular topics that also a lot of other research teams are interested in and to compare. So if we start organizing some, let us say, Slack voting, so for me, the good indicator would be like how many people would participate in that task. So that, of course, when their steering committee is like doing the judgment, it's also about if people are basically good in organizing and providing the quality to the task, but also of course that has to be charged, but also the topic itself. So I would be careful to open it completely to everyone is voting and whatever the top 5 is allowed to do. But yeah, maybe something like that, like gathering the information for particular challenge topics, how much interest of people like raising the hand and say, yes, we are going to submit that topic that is interesting for our research.
Okay, thanks, Hanna. Hanna, I think Magdalena, last thoughts from you on this.
Yeah, I have less experience on challenges. I've just participated in the organization of one that Mark Cartwright was leading. Yeah, I think I echo a little bit, Hanna. I think that both like the intention of someone submitting and the actual submission, there is a gap there as well that we have to be careful about. But yeah, those ideas sound good.
Okay, well, I'd really like to warmly thank all of our panel members, Hanna, Romain, Magdalena, and Dan, for the discussions this afternoon. I think there have been some really interesting insights to the state of the DCASE community and options for where we can go forward. And I'd like to invite you to all applaud in this rather strangely silent way, all the panel members. So thanks very much again to the panel. And back to you, Frederick.